Welcome to our weekly class on the Parsha. This is the final Torah reading before the upcoming holiday of Shavuot. And there's a reason why this particular Parsha is read right before Shavuos every year, except in certain years we also read next week's Parsha. Also, we do that before Shavuos as well. But in most years, it's just Bamidbar, the beginning of the fourth book of the Torah, the book known as the Book of Numbers. That's the English name for it. And it's also referred to by that name in Hebrew. It's called Chumash HaPekudim, the Book of Numbers. But the more popular name for this book is Bamidbar, in the desert, which many people would say is the name of the book only because it's one of the opening words. The Parsha begins with the words, "And God spoke to Moses in the Sinai desert." So call the book Vayidaber, and he spoke. That's a prosaic word. It doesn't tell you much. So the word Bamidbar is the first significant word, you could say. But the Rabbi would always emphasize that in Torah there's no such thing as something that's there arbitrarily, that it has no real depth to it. There's a depth to it, that this book is called Bamidbar, in the desert. And it's the book that we begin reading, and the Parsha that we begin reading, which has the same name as the book, Bamidbar, right before Shavuos. And what is the reason for that? So there are many explanations given by our sages in the Midrash and in other works that the Torah wants to emphasize that in order for us to receive the Torah, we must be in a state of Bamidbar, of the desert. What does that mean? Why do we have to be in the desert? Why was the Torah given in the desert? The question is asked. The Torah should have been given in a place where people live. Excuse me, a place that's populated, and especially in Israel, the Holy Land. Wouldn't it have made much more sense for the Jews to go right out of Egypt, straight to the Promised Land with the Torah given there, maybe even in Yerushalayim, at the site of the Beis Hamikdash? No, but the Torah was given in the middle of the desert on a very inconspicuous mountain. Mount Sinai was not an important mountain, and to this day it's not an important mountain. We don't even know for sure where Mount Sinai is. There are different theories about where it is. Apparently, it's not that important for us to identify Mount Sinai. That itself begs a question, which will be answered separately. But why a desert of all places? So the Talmud says because in order for us to be receptive to the Torah, we have to make ourselves like a desert, which means we have to be humble. A desert is a place that has nothing growing, has nothing to brag about. A person, to be receptive to the Torah, has to have this humility. And the reason for that is, it's true about every area of knowledge to some extent, not as much as it is with regard to Torah. If a person is full of himself and wants to approach a new discipline, they're going to absorb, they're going to attack the new subject with preconceived ideas, because after all, the person who has a big ego says, I understand things the way I understand them, and the way I understand them is obviously the right way, and therefore I'm going to approach this new discipline with preconceived notions. And when you do that, you're not really receptive to the new idea, because the new idea might have a different approach to things. You're not receptive to that. People who have big egos are not receptive to the views of other people. The Rebbe once explained why it's important when you study Torah to have a study partner. This is the system in all yeshivas and all Jewish schools, where every student is paired up with another student. And the Rebbe said it's better that way for two reasons: from the perspective of your godly soul and from the perspective of your animal soul. Well, for the godly soul, we understand that when you're arguing with someone, you're looking for the truth. And if your study partner has a different view, because your godly soul is humble and receptive, you'll be receptive to the other person's view, which might be the correct one. Your own view might not be correct. So it's always good to have a study partner because your godly soul will always want to receive from him. And if he makes a mistake, your godly soul will try to correct him. But then also your animal soul is better off if you have a study partner. Why? Because your animal soul has an ego. And sometimes the ego is a good thing because the ego will make you argue with your partner to show him that he's wrong. And meanwhile, that will elicit a response from the partner who will defend his own understanding, his own thesis. And by doing that, you become much more knowledgeable of the subject. Things become much more clarified because the more you argue about something, the more you delve into it, the better understanding you'll have. But as a general rule, if you have a big ego, you're not going to want to hear what others say about the subject. That's true about every subject, but it's especially true about Torah, because Torah is divine wisdom. A person cannot be receptive to divine wisdom if they have an ego, because the Talmud, when it talks about a person who's a Baal Gaiva, a real arrogant, conceited egotist, the Talmud says that God says about this person, Ein ani v'hu yecholim lader. I cannot dwell with him. It's either me or him. There's no room for both of us. So if there's no room for both of us, meaning God and the person with a big ego, then you're not going to be receptive to the divine aspect of Torah. Yes, you can study Torah as a subject. There are people who are atheists who certainly don't believe in the divine authorship of the Torah, but they love the Torah's intellectual challenges. They love the poetry. They love the argumentation. They love the legalistic theories. They love the give and take. Torah is a beautiful intellectual exercise, very challenging. So there are people who don't believe in any of it, but still study it diligently with great fervor, but they can't absorb the true essence of the Torah. The true essence of the Torah will be elusive to them because their godly soul is covered up by their ego of their animal soul, and therefore they're not really receptive to the truth, to the true divine character of Torah. And that's why the Torah was given in a desert to emphasize the importance of being like a desert. A desert is a symbol of humility, so we can be receptive. This notion that Torah is given to us only if we are humble is also, I mentioned this last week, when we read the Parsha of Bahar, the week before last week, when we read the Parsha of Bahar, which emphasizes how the Torah was given on Mount Sinai. Why was the Torah given on Mount Sinai? So again, our sages tell us that Sinai was the lowest of all the mountains in that region. And while the larger mountains wanted to be the mountains upon which the Torah would be given, of course, mountains don't have a mind of their own, but there are angels that are in charge of the mountains, in charge of all the natural forces and elements, and each one was arguing, I should be the one to receive the Torah. God says, no, he overrode all of the other mountains' desire to be the ones upon which the Torah would be given, and he chose Mount Sinai because Mount Sinai is the lowest of all the mountains, to emphasize you have to have humility. And this is the explanation given to the opening words of Ethics of the Fathers, where it says Moses received the Torah from Sinai. And the question is asked, why does it mention Sinai there? Moses didn't get the Torah from Sinai. Sinai is a mountain. Mountains don't give Torah. That he got the Torah from God on Mount Sinai. So the main point that he received the Torah from God is not mentioned. It's assumed. And this incidental part of it, that it was on Mount Sinai, it seems to be the main point over here, that he got the Torah from Sinai. So one of the interpretations is that Moses himself was the most humble of people. And he certainly didn't feel qualified to be the one through whom the Torah should be given, just like he didn't want to be the liberator of the Jewish people. And he says, who am I? I'm not qualified. Choose my brother, Aaron. Choose someone else. So why is it when God said to give the Torah that he would give it through Moses, and Moses didn't argue? Moses didn't assert his not being worthy of receiving the Torah. And the answer is that Moses looked at where God gave the Torah, that he gave it on a mountain, but a very low mountain. So in other words, he said that God wants to give the Torah to the lowest of elements. He prefers the lowest over the higher. So therefore, I qualify as being on the lowest level. Now, of course, we discussed this many times, that Moses was not naive. Moses knew that he had qualities and talents and powers that no other Jew had. In all of human history, there was never a human being as great as Moses in terms of his holiness, his prophecy, which the Torah itself testifies about, and that he was the liberator of the Jewish people, the one who gave them the Torah, and everything else that the Torah tells about Moses. How can Moses deny his greatness? And the answer given, there are several answers, but one of the answers given is that Moses felt that everything that he had was a gift given to him by God. And if God had chosen someone else upon whom to bestow those gifts, they would have been even better and more qualified than Moses. And it reminds me of the cute anecdote they tell of two beggars who were arguing about Rothschild's wealth. And one of them said, if I would have Rothschild's wealth, I would be richer than Rothschild. So the other one said, how could you be richer than him? You'd be as rich, but you wouldn't be richer. He says, no, I would beg on the side. That Moses felt that all of the gifts that he had were not his. They were given to him by God. And the little that he did was like a beggar's contribution. Very, very little. He didn't have very much. And others would have given much more if they had these gifts. So at any rate, Moses felt qualified to receive the Torah because he felt the Torah was specifically directed to the people on the lowest of levels. Now, of course, Moses was not on the lowest of levels, but in his mind, that's what motivated him to be willing and eager to be the one through whom the Torah should be given. So at any rate, we know that it's important that the Torah be received by those of us who exhibit humility and work on that humility so we're receptive to the Torah, especially on the holiday of Shavuos. Now, there's another reason why the Torah was given in a desert, also by our sages in the Talmud and Midrash. The desert, at least in those days, was ownerless. Nobody could claim ownership over the desert, and in those days, no one wanted ownership over the desert because the desert was barren, as desolate, was not a place where anything positive could be obtained from it. They didn't know about the oil that you can find in the desert. The desert was just a barren place. As the Torah describes the desert, in the book of Deuteronomy, the Torah describes a desert where there is nothing going on, nothing growing, and it's only a place infested with snakes and scorpions. It's a place that humans abandon. So the Torah wanted to be given specifically in a desert to emphasize that in order for you to receive the Torah, everyone is eligible. This sounds like the contradiction to the first reason. The first reason says the Torah was given specifically to humble people. This reason is that nobody should say that the Torah can only be given to people who are on a high spiritual level, people who are in Israel, in a holy place. The Torah was given to an ownerless place because the Torah belongs to everyone. There's no such thing as a Jew who can say that the Torah is not mine. The Torah was not intended for me. The story is told in Simchas Torah, when we rejoice with the Torah, and this is in the synagogue of the famous Hasidic master, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev, and there was a simple Jew who was really very, very ignorant of Torah, was dancing with tremendous fervor. And the Rabbi Levi Yitzchak went over to him. He says, why are you dancing? You don't know Torah. And Rabbi Levi Yitzchak used to do this to elicit responses from simple people that he felt that he cherished. And the man said, if my brother is getting married, do I not rejoice? So in other words, the man was saying that though I don't have a part of Torah myself, but it's my brother has a part, so I'm rejoicing for the others. And the Rebbe would always quote this story and add the addendum that it's much more than just your brother's wedding. It's your wedding because Torah belongs to every single Jew. Now, it sounds like a contradiction to what I said before, that in order to receive Torah, you have to have humility. But if you don't have humility, you can't access the Torah. Well, we're going to have to qualify that somewhat. The truth is that before we are born, the Talmud tells us an angel teaches us the whole Torah. And when we're born, we forget it all. So that we have to get this knowledge through our own efforts. Why did God have the angel teach us Torah if we're supposed to forget it anyhow and we have to acquire Torah through our own efforts? So what was the point in teaching us in our mother's womb? And the answer is that since Torah is divine, we could never have mastered Torah on our own. It would have been totally impossible. So God had to give us the Torah before we're born In other words, God made us receptive to the divine aspect of Torah before we're born. But that could be covered up. In order to expose it, we need to study Torah and recognizing that Torah is much more than just human wisdom, as brilliant and as beautiful and as exhilarating as it can be. It's much more than that. It's infinitely more than that. Torah is the ultimate divine wisdom, and that means that every Jew has a connection to Torah before they're even born. But to reveal that connection, you need humility to be receptive to it. Now, the Torah portion begins with the counting of the Jewish people, and that's the reason it's called Numbers, because this book has several places where the Jewish people are counted. So when the Torah tells us to count the Jewish people from the age of 20, men between the ages of 20 and 60, Rashi makes the following comment. This takes place, the Torah says, in the second year that they were in the desert, and the second month of the second year. So Rashi says, why is he counting them all the time? He says, because he loves them, so he counts them all the time. When they left Egypt, he counted them. When they fell in the golden calf sin, he counted them to know how many survived. And when he came to dwell amongst them, he counted them. And that's what happened in the second year. The first of Nisan, the Mishkan, the portable sanctuary, was erected. And a month later, he counts them. So he counts them in these three places. Number one, when they left Egypt. Number two, when they perished the golden calf. And number three, when he came to dwell amongst them. So what does it mean that he counts them all the time? There are just three times. So one way of looking at it is that sometimes you count someone. Why do you count someone? It's a sign of affection. People who love their money count their money all the time. Even if they know how much they have, they'll do it again. It's something precious to them. That's in the negative sense. But in the positive sense, when you count things, you indicate how precious it is. Now, when we talk about how precious things are, there are times when we don't really have that love so overtly experienced. When they left Egypt, the Jewish people were very raw. They were described as being naked. They had no mitzvahs. They actually had 2 mitzvahs given to them at the end, so they should have something in their hands, as our sages tell us, the mitzvah of circumcision and the paschal offering. But the people, as the prophet describes them as being naked, they didn't really have much substance. And you would think that that's not the time that God would try to show his love for them. And then God counts them even then. When they fall with the golden calf, you would think, well, the Jewish people made such a bad choice with the golden calf, such a reversal of their spirituality. They reached the pinnacle of spirituality when they got the Torah at Mount Sinai. After 50 days of counting, of preparation, they reached the pinnacle. And 40 days later, they degenerate into the most evil sin of idol worship and other sins that accompany the idol worship, the orgies that accompanied it. How could they sink so low? And at that, and that's why many of them perished. And specifically at that time, you'd think the marriage is gone. This is the end of the relationship. If it's the end of the relationship, God is not going to show them that he loves them by counting them. So the Torah says no. He counted them specifically at a time when the relationship was at the lowest point, because God is indicating, as the prophet later on confirms, that as bad as we could be, God never gives us a divorce. The separation, but never a divorce. It may look like a divorce. When you look at the suffering of the Jewish people throughout history, one could think that God is no longer on our side. We're no longer his chosen people. We're no longer treated as his children, as his spouse. And that's not true. God never stops loving us in spite of all the suffering that we go through, which we can never really fully explain, which is a subject unto itself, which we won't go into right now. It says precisely at a time when you would think that God is not going to show his love to them, God shows the love by counting them after the golden calf. We find in the Talmud when the enemy came into the Beis Hamikdash, to the Holy Temple, and their keruvim, these angelic figures, were in an embrace with one another. And what that meant was that God was on their side. It says in the Talmud that when the Jewish people didn't behave, the faces of the keruvim, of the angelic faces, turned away from each other. But precisely at the time when the temple was destroyed, the keruvim, the faces, were embracing one another. And the Rebbe explains that precisely at a time when God shows his wrath and is punishing us and is driving us into exile, God shows them that his truth is that he has the tremendous love for them, that love is never going to be lost. And then the third time that they're counted, when they are already in the process, God is dwelling amongst them. The Mishkan was erected on the 1st of Nisan. The honeymoon is over. You would think, what's the point of showing the love? It's no longer a honeymoon. And precisely at that time, God says they should be counted. So we're counted all the time, certainly even in times when we don't seem to be worthy of being counted to show God's love for us. Even then, and how much more so all the other times. And we pray to God that love he should express to us today. We need it much more than any other time in recent history because of what's going on in the land of Israel. Now, why does God want to count them? Why do they have to have a census? It sounds like this is a military census. They should know how many soldiers they have, but it goes much deeper than that. One of the great 17th century sages known as the Shalah, Rabbi Shaya Halevi Horowitz, explains that counting is a sign of affection, but it's more than that. There's a law in the Talmud that if a non-kosher substance falls into a larger volume of kosher substance, let's say you're cooking meat, you have or chicken soup, and by accident a few drops of some milk splatter into the soup pot, and it's now all mixed up. Could you eat the soup? Milk and meat cooked together is not kosher. But in this case, if there's a volume, there's a ratio of 60-1, 60 times as much meat or soup as there is milk, then the whole mixture is kosher. Now, if it was a piece of meat, of non-kosher meat that fell into the vat of kosher meat, the same thing applies, except if you can see the non-kosher piece of meat, you take it out. But anything else that was mixed into the pot is nullified by a ratio of 60-1. Okay, that's one basic rule that's based on biblical interpretation. But then the rabbis came along and they said there are exceptions to this rule. If the non-kosher item is significant, then it doesn't become nullified. Significant things don't lose their status, no matter how many more times of the other substance there are in comparison to the forbidden substance. In other words, if someone was handling a non-kosher steak and the non-kosher steak falls into the pot of kosher steaks, it can happen, I guess. Someone orders meat from the tells someone to go to the supermarket to get meat, and in the freezer department there's kosher meat, and someone by accident put non-kosher steak there, and people don't usually look. They know it's the kosher section. So you took a non-kosher steak together with kosher steaks or any other kind of meat. I'm not a chef. And you put it in a pot, and then you realize that there was 60 times as much kosher meat as there was non-kosher. It doesn't become nullified because a steak is a significant thing. The expression the Talmud uses is a piece that is worthy of using to serve someone at a banquet. You're not going to serve someone a little crumb of meat. You'll serve them something, a whole portion. If it's a whole portion intact that falls into and gets mixed up, it does not become nullified. So by counting the Jewish people, God was saying these people are significant and they can never become nullified. That means no matter what happens to the Jewish people, no matter how much persecution we endure, no matter how much are the challenges of assimilation, and indeed many individual Jews do get lost, the Jewish people can never lose their identity. We are an eternal people. If only the anti-Semites of the world would learn history and would see how much, in spite of all the persecution, We overcame all the adversity. We survived all the threats to our existence. We buried our enemies. They are no longer around. Their heirs no longer exist. They are footnotes of history. They're rendered to the ash heap of history, and we are still here, vibrant, strong, growing, and having a future guaranteed to us. We are an immortal people. And the reason why we are an immortal people is connected to the Torah that we received on Shavuos. When God created the world, He created it in 6 days. Every day it says Yom Echad, Yom Sheni, Yom Shlishi, day 3, day 4, day 5. The 6th day, it doesn't say the day 6. It says Yom HaShishi, the 6th day, using the definite article, as if to say there's something special about the 6th day. So the Talmud says, what's so special about the 6th day? It's an allusion. It's a hint to the 6th day of the month of Sivan, the day on which God gave us the Torah. That means that the world was waiting in order for it to be complete to the day that we got the Torah. And as our sages tell us, that had the Jewish people not accepted the Torah when God offered it to them, the world would have not had a reason to exist anymore. It would have reverted to nothingness. So there's a verse in the book of Psalms, the world was trembling, and then it became tranquil. Why was it trembling? Because the whole existence of the universe, when I say earth, I don't just mean the earth, the universe. There's no reason for God to have a universe except for the purpose of the Torah. And the only way the Torah can be implemented is through the Jewish people to whom God gave the Torah. Non-Jews have their mission in making the world a civilized world, tikkun olam, fixing the world. That's a non-Jewish responsibility that Jews also have, obviously, but it's specifically for non-Jews that's their role. Our role is to embrace the Torah and bring the divine into this world through the Torah and its commandments. If the Torah had not been accepted by the Jewish people, there would be no world. So there's a rule this establishes that just like there can never be a time when the Torah won't exist, Torah is eternal, so too the Jewish people are an eternal, immortal people. They must exist because God is not going to give the Torah again. It's a one-time thing. If we embrace it, fine. If we don't embrace it, that's the end of existence. So there's a law of physics. It's as strong as any law of physics, maybe even stronger, that the Jewish people must survive and must flourish because the world cannot exist without us. Is that chauvinistic? If it sounds chauvinistic, so be it, but it's not chauvinistic, because what it's saying is that we have an incredible responsibility. We have no right to get rid of ourselves. We can't destroy ourselves. We have a responsibility not only for ourselves, but for the whole universe. The whole universe is waiting for us to embrace the Torah. And even though the Torah had already been given, every year when we embrace the Torah, we strengthen the whole Jewish people, of course, but not only the Jewish people, but all of humanity and all of existence. And that's why we read about the counting of the Jewish people before receiving the Torah at Mount Sinai, to indicate that in order for the Torah, to be accepted, there's a need for a Jewish people. They can never lose their identity. If we would become nullified, if we could lose our identity, then God would have no guarantee that the Torah would be kept, and there'd be no reason for the world. So there's a need for the Jewish people's integrity to be maintained and established by counting in this week's Torah portion that we read always before Shavuos.
I have a question, Rabbi.
Yes?
So, the outcome of Shavuos, and it was given in the desert, and it was away from Israel. God promised us promised land, Alvam and other aspects. If it's given where it could be anywhere, why Israel? And the second question really has to do more current events in the last 2,000 years. for Jews, the first kingdom of Israel, and the second, they went to the state of Israel in 48. Why would God give us a land that we have enemies on every borders throughout history?
Okay, the first question is, what's the role of Israel? If the Torah was given in the desert to emphasize that everyone can claim ownership to the Torah is free for all to take, not just certain individuals. But that doesn't mean that the Torah remained in a desert. The Torah was then, the Jewish people were then brought to Israel, because the way to implement God's plan in the Torah is through Israel. Number one, of the 613 commandments, there are hundreds of commandments that only apply to Israel. They only apply to Yerushalayim, to the Beis Hamikdash, and to Israel in general. So while the Torah is implemented primarily in Israel, it wasn't given in Israel because otherwise people would think, if I don't live in Israel, if I'm not on a holy level, the Torah is not for me. Yet the Torah is for everyone. And as far as why God made that Israel should be surrounded with enemies, that's a good question. Even if it wouldn't be Israel, why do the Jewish people have to suffer? Well, the Talmud says that everything that we have was given to us through pain. No pain, no gain, as they say. We got Israel with effort, with suffering. We were in Egypt before we got to Israel, before we got the Torah. There are three things that we get, three gifts that we get through Yisurim, through suffering. One is the Torah, second one is Israel, and the third one is Olam Haba, the world to come, which we're waiting for the coming of Mashiach, when the world will become a perfect world, but we had to go through all this suffering. Now, that doesn't mean that we should in any way ask for suffering. God gave it to us, and we have to accept it, but we also have to pray to God to relieve the world from that suffering. But suffering is we don't know why God wants suffering in this world. We know what suffering accomplishes. Suffering and pain cleanses a person and prepares them for something holy and special. And whatever suffering we had in the past, we're satisfied with that. We don't need any new suffering.
Hey, thank you, Rabbi.
Now, just on a lighter note, and I'll conclude with this, when they were supposed to count all the people of each tribe, every tribe had its leader, and they would be the ones to accompany Moses and Aaron in counting the Jewish people. So it would be done tribe by tribe. And the Torah lists the names of the leaders of each tribe. And the tribe of Shimon's leader was a man called Shlemiel. You ever heard of the expression a Shlemiel? A Shlemiel is a hapless person, a person who's just nothing works. He does everything. There's another expression in Yiddish, Shlemazel. The Shlemiel, Shlemazel, and Nudnik. So one person once said, what's the difference? The Shlemiel pours out the soup on the lap of the Shlemazel, and the Nudnik asks, what kind of soup was it? Chicken soup or some other kind of soup? So a Shlemiel is a nebuch, someone who can't get his act together. Well, why was Shimon's leader called Shlemiel? The use of the word Shlemiel came after this, but some say that the tribe of Shimon were known for being very poor. In other words, they were not successful at anything. They were always failing in their endeavors. So they were the Shlemiels. The word Shlemazel comes from two Hebrew words, shalo mazel, no luck. Someone who's always out of luck. I don't know where the word nudnik comes from.